Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today I'm going to be talking about the top 15 bucket list trips ranked in 2024. Now, there's been a survey done, and I was reading it this morning, which was really interesting, from having a company called the Bucket List Company. Obviously, we set it up to offer these once in a lifetime bucket list trips. And it's really interesting by going through the list of the top 15 for 2024, how many we are already covering. And for me, that's great news because it means that we're offering what people want to see, want to do, where to go. So that's great. So I thought today I would record an episode and go through those top 15. There are a few there we don't offer, which is interesting. There's a few there that are on the list that we are going to be offering, so that's even better news. And there's a couple, and there's one there that I think we will really struggle with. So I'm going to go in reverse order, which makes an interesting read, I think. So at number 15, it's to go surfing in Indonesia. Now, we have set up a new trip to Indonesia, and although it's not a surf trip, there is free time within the trip to allow you to tick that bit off your bucket list. It's a really interesting trip to Indonesia. If it's not on your bucket list, obviously, you know, a lot of people think about Bali as their go-to. But obviously, Bali is just part of that trip and it covers more in Indonesia as well. So if you've got Indonesia on your bucket list, so have quite a lot of other people because it ranks in at number 15 in the chart. And I'll put links to all of our trips. I'll put the list into the show notes, but I'll also put links to our trips in there as well, so you can see which ones of this list we actually offer. So at number 15, it's surfing in Indonesia. At number 14 is a trip that I actually went on this year, and that's to visit Angkor Wat. So Angkor Wat is in Cambodia, and that's part of our Vietnam and Cambodia tour that we offer. Since we launched that trip, it's been really, really popular. It's a great itinerary. It covers off so much. You travel right through down north to south, down through Vietnam into Cambodia, and then you finish at Siem Reap, where Angkor Wat is. So if you've got Angkor Wat on your bucket list, then that's a great trip. If you haven't done Vietnam already, obviously, if you've already traveled to Vietnam, then kind of it might be a bit of repetition on what you've already done. But it was a brilliant trip. I really enjoyed it. We've done a podcast on Cambodia. We've done a podcast on Vietnam, and that I recorded whilst I was on the trip, actually. So that one comes in at number 14, visiting Angkor Wat. And it was truly spectacular arriving there and seeing the sunrise come up over Angkor Wat. So if you've got that on your bucket list, again, lots of people also have. Number 13 was a trip that we launched last year, which is riding a hot air balloon above Cappadocia. Now, Cappadocia, again, we've done a podcast on this. It kind of hit the Instagram trend a few years ago with the hot air balloons over Cappadocia, and it is truly stunning. I would go and do it again and again and again. Like, I've done the hot air balloon ride in Cappadocia twice now. I would certainly go back again next month and do it again if I had the opportunity. Trip starts for us in Istanbul, which is generally where you would, if you went to Turkey, you would generally fly in to Istanbul, and then you would get an internal flight then down to Cappadocia. You can drive, but it is a fair length of a drive, so I would well advise flying down there. Cappadocia is just not about the balloons. I think that's the key thing from this. There is more to see, more to do there than just going up in a hot air balloon. And actually, for me, standing there in the town, watching the balloons go up in the morning was almost as good as actually being in the hot air balloon yourself. I think when we went, there was kind of like 300 balloons went up that day. But it's an incredible sight, and one that, again, if you haven't ticked it off your bucket list yet, you should really get it added on, because it is an amazing, amazing opportunity. Now, number 12 is currently not on our list, and that's to see the Grand Canyon. We were due to launch a Grand Canyon trip prior to COVID, and then we never launched it in the end. And actually, it's on my radar again to be launched very, very soon. I've actually got a meeting next month to get this one sorted and get it on our list. So we will be adding the Grand Canyon and trekking in the Grand Canyon and a tour of the area to the Bucket List Company portfolio of trips very, very soon. So if that's on your list, then you can get that one ticked off with the Bucket List Company as well. Coming in at number 11, and we have got our first one of these trips going out early in 2025, and that's gorilla trekking on lots of people's bucket lists. And we are so excited about running our first trip. The trip is sold really well for us, and there's a lot of interest in it. And future dates are also filling up nicely for gorilla trekking as well. It is certainly not a cheap activity. It's certainly not a cheap trip. But again, one that appears on lots and lots of people's bucket lists. And, you know, we actually launched it. It was very funny. The story for this one, you might have heard it if you've listened to the podcast for a while, but one of our clients wanted to do this for their 50th birthday. And she kept pestering me saying, are you going to be launching a gorilla trekking trip? Because I want to do that in 2025 for my 50th. And then in the end, she came back to me and said, if you're not going to add this trip, then I'm going to have to go and find a company that does do it. So we quickly put the trip together. And I think the itinerary that we've got is really good. It's not just gorillas. There's safaris in there as well. There's visiting the chimpanzees in there as well. So there's lots more in that itinerary than just going gorilla trekking. So I think you really do make the most out of your time in Uganda. So number 11 then is gorilla trekking. Moving on to number 10, which is one I think we'll struggle with for quite some time. But apparently on the list, number 10 for people's bucket lists is space travel, which is one we're probably not going to go into for a considerable few years. But that made the number 10 spot, which was, people wanted to go into space. Obviously, there are a few companies out there that are offering that. But I think the monthly payment plans for that one would be slightly on the larger side than what our current trip offerings are. Again, number 9 currently isn't on our portfolio of trips. And number 9 is dive the Great Barrier Reef. Now, lots of people ask me why we don't have Australia on our portfolio of trips. And my reply to that is always that Australia is such a big place. How can we put together an itinerary for Australia? Obviously, everyone's got different things that they want to do, different things. I mean, obviously, yes, there are the classics. Go to Sydney and see the Opera House, go to the Great Barrier Reef. There are those things that would appear on the majority of people's bucket lists if they wanted to go. But I just think that everyone has so many different things that they want to do in Australia and varying things. It would be very difficult for us to put an itinerary together that actually met what people had on their bucket list. So that's kind of at the minute why we've stayed away from it. I'm not saying that we will always stay away from it. I'm just saying that at the minute, it's not one that we are we are planning, from where we are in the UK, it's also a very, very long way to travel. And you would need to have quite an extended trip, I think. And, it's not going to be your standard 2-week itinerary. But for lots of people, it is. And diving on the Great Barrier Reef appears at number 9 on that list of top bucket list destinations for 2024. Number 8 is one we offer. And that's going on an African safari. Now, if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll have heard me speak so many times about how amazing safaris are in Tanzania. And I think Tanzania has the most to offer for an African safari, in terms of what you see, in terms of the quality of the accommodation, in terms of the price point as well. I think you get such a great package. And if you are thinking about a safari, then Tanzania is definitely somewhere that you should look at. The fact that you can get in so many different national parks in a very short amount of time, I think is one of the major plus points. Our safari trip, for example, is Lake Manyara, the Tarangire National Park, Ngorongoro Crater, and then down to the Serengeti. And I did that trip last year, and I had seen the Big Five before we'd even gotten down to the Serengeti. And then the Serengeti, going and seeing the migration was just absolutely stunning. The accommodation we stayed at was amazing. The quality of the lodges and the camps was superb. So yeah, if you are thinking of doing a African safari, then have a look at Tanzania as a potential destination for you. I know lots of people do safari trips all the time. And obviously, you hear of South Africa, Kruger, you hear Kenya mentioned a lot, but you don't kind of hear Tanzania mentioned so much. And I think it should definitely be up there if you are considering an African safari. So that's number 8 on the list. Number 7 on the list then is one we offer lots of, and that's Everest Base Camp. That appears in at number 7 on the list of 15. I don't really need to talk about this one too much. We speak loads on the podcast about Everest Base Camp. It is just an absolutely amazing trek. If that's your thing, then you should definitely add it to your bucket list if you haven't already done so. Number 6 is explore the ancient city of Petra. Obviously, there is a little bit, with Jordan at the minute being next to Israel, the Middle East. There are obviously those issues there. At the minute, it is still safe to go to Jordan. People are still flying. Airlines are still flying to Jordan. Jordan is still fully open. There is no government restrictions from our perspective about heading to Jordan at the minute. Although, I can understand people's reluctance to travel to the Middle East at the minute. But that's not to say that that's going to be forever, and you should remove that from your bucket list. Jordan is such an amazing country. Petra is such an amazing thing to go and see. And you should keep it on your bucket list. Maybe just delay it and add one of the other trips in before that one. But it will still be there at some point for you to go and see it if that's what you want to do. But obviously, like I said, it is open now. You can still go. It would just be entirely to how you felt about that. Number 5 is one trip that I am working on at the minute, which is to take an Antarctic cruise. We've spoken about this on the podcast as well. I am busy working away at getting that one set up, ready to launch. I know it appears on lots of our bucket listers' bucket lists that they want that trip. Hence why I'm frantically trying to put the pieces together to make that work. Again, it's never going to be a cheap trip going to the Antarctic. But one that lots of people want to tick off that continent. I think if you're a continent ticker, that might end up being one of your final continents to tick off that you want to do. So I can understand why it appears on so many people's bucket lists. Number 4 is climb Kilimanjaro. I've been fortunate enough to tick that one off my bucket list 15 times now. And I'm so glad to see that it appears so high up the list and on so many other people's bucket lists. Obviously, we run loads of Kilimanjaro trips in a year. If you like your hiking trips, then, you've probably got Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp. They just appear on your bucket list and ones that you want to tick off. Obviously, they're, are varying different routes. We've done podcasts on those. I'm not going to go into too many details on those now. But Kilimanjaro sits in at number 4 on the list. We're getting into the top 3 now. And I'm glad to say that we have got all of these 3 on that we offer all of these 3 as our trip. So that's great news from our perspective, that we're kind of looking at what our customers want. But at number 3 is visit the Galapagos Islands. Now, at the minute, although I say we visit the Galapagos Islands, we don't have a separate trip to the Galapagos at the minute. But again, it's one we are looking at adding in 2025. And at the minute, to visit the Galapagos, we do it as an add-on to a Machu Picchu trek. So if you're doing any of our Machu Picchu trips, you can then add that on to your itinerary and go to the Galapagos while you're there, which actually does make sense because you've already flown to South America anyway. So while you're there, you might as well tick off 2 things from your bucket list at that point. But like I say, there are people who maybe already done Machu Picchu before, and then they want to go to the Galapagos, and they're then, they're not going to go back and do Machu Picchu again. And we appreciate that there are those people there. So we are going to be launching a new Ecuador Galapagos trip for 2025, which should be coming out in the new year. Number 2, then, we just discussed it briefly with the Galapagos, and coming in at number 2 is actually trekking the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. Now, I'm not sure whether or not, we've discussed this again on the podcast loads, whether or not people just assume that you have to do the Inca Trail to do Machu Picchu. But obviously, we offer 3 different treks with Machu Picchu, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the Inca Trail. But I was a little bit surprised to see that one did come in at number 2, which is great. But at the same time, I just thought that there was some of the other ones that might have appeared higher on it. We sell far more Everest Base Camp treks, for example, than we do Machu Picchu treks. So that was kind of the shock for me when I was reading through this report. But it's great to see that it's up there. It's great to see that it's still super popular. And it's obviously something we can play on for the next year of showing how popular that actually Machu Picchu and the Inca Trail is. So let's have a quick rundown again and just remind ourselves before we look at what number 1 was. So at number 15 was surf in Indonesia. Number 14 was visit Angkor Wat. Number 13 was riding a hot air balloon above Cappadocia. Number 12 was see the Grand Canyon. Number 11 was gorilla trekking. Number 10 was the one that we can't offer at the minute because it's space travel. Number 9, dive the Great Barrier Reef. Number 8, go on an African safari. Number 7 was the Everest Base Camp trek. Number 6 was explore the ancient city of Petra. Number 5 was the Antarctic cruise. Number 4 was climb Kilimanjaro. Number 3 was visit the Galapagos Islands. And number 2 was trekking the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, which then leaves number 1. And this was a bit of a surprise to me, really, that it got the number 1 spot. But number 1 was see the Northern Lights. Now, interestingly, I saw the Northern Lights in North Devon 2 weeks ago when we had that really clear spell. And I got a brilliant view of the Northern Lights in North Devon. But I'm assuming people are thinking of doing kind of Iceland Northern Lights is what they're doing. And obviously, we've got our Iceland trips as well, where we go and see the Northern Lights. Lots of people head over to Iceland every year. Iceland, unfortunately, is not a cheap trip considering how close it is to us. Even though it's a kind of a short haul European trip, they do come in very, very expensive compared to other locations. I mean, an Iceland trip is kind of the same money as a Machu Picchu trip. So, and you've got a lot longer flight involved in that one. So Northern Lights takes the top of the list, which is great to see. Like, we would love to do more and more and more Iceland trips. But I think it's great from the bucket list company's perspective that we can see that actually, just looking down through the list, currently out of those top 15, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 of the 15 you can currently do with the bucket list company. And then, like I said, we are then looking at least adding 2 more of those. So out of that top 15, you will be able to do 13 of those trips with the bucket list company, which is great from our perspective because it means that we know what people want. We can put together great itineraries on actually, we're doing what the name says on the tin. We are providing bucket list adventures around the world, which is great to hear. It would be interesting, though, to know how many of those bucket list trips you've already ticked off and how you think about that list. I mean, obviously, a bucket list is such an individual thing for people. And, obviously, everyone's going to have a different bucket list. But some things might match over in terms of you might listen to that list and go, yeah, there's 2 or 3 there that I'd have on my bucket list. But you might have completely other things on yours that are completely different to that list. And of course, that's fine. We're just looking there at kind of the top ranked ones for 2024. And obviously, there are plenty of trips out there. I mean, we get asked to do trips all the time. Unfortunately, we need to look at it from a commercial perspective in the sense of how many other people actually want to go and do this trip. And, is it something that we can commercially sell to the masses? And that's what we look at when we are thinking about launching a trip is, not being super niche and only being able to sell a few of them. Unfortunately, although that would be great, as running a business in adventure travel, we need to make sure there's enough need for those trips. So anyway, hope you found this episode useful. That's the top 15 in 2024. Like I say, I'd be interested to know how many of those either A, you've been on, or B, how many are on your bucket list. And I'm quite fortunate enough to have ticked the majority of those off. I mean, space travel would be on my bucket list. I just don't think I would be able to afford it quite just yet. Anyway, that's it from me this week. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please head over and give us a like and a subscribe to let you know when the next episodes will be dropping into your inbox. And yeah, like I said, I'll be back with another episode next week. But until then, thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.